Welcome to the first part of my second video series on the channel. This series will be primarily on comparing the old version of the game from 2019 to 2023 to the new version of the game, which is 2024 to present day. And this video series will cover which version of the game is better, which version of the game takes more skill, and which version of the game is more powerful. This series will be a 3-part series for focusing on all the aforementioned topics. I was considering to make a 4th part debating on which version of the game had better balancing, but I decided to just fit that section of the video in this part, which is which version of the game was actually better. So, I'm going to judge this on seven different aspects of the game, and whichever part of the game is better in most aspects will have the victor of which is the better game. All 7 aspects I list will be ranked in order. First and most important is actual gameplay. This is basically just combat. I could get into more and tell you how I rate this criteria, but that would be a waste of time because it's literally just combat. Second most important criteria is balancing and meta. This will be based on which kaiju are meta, how balanced certain kaijus are, how fair each level of the game is, and most importantly, if the meta makes actual sense. Third is progression and economy. This is basically how easy it is to level kaiju, how easy it is to obtain G-cells, and how easy each part of the game is to achieve, but most importantly, whether or not it is actually fair. And the 4th is technical stability. This is basically just ping and FPS to summarize. It's a little bit more than that, but that's basically what it is. 5th is content and variety. This is basically how much you can do in the game. 6th is presentation and polish. This is audio design, animation quality, map design, and overall the visual professionalism of the game. 7th and last is development. This is update frequency, developer communication, how they handle player feedback, essentially. Now that we have all our criteria down, let's get into each topic and compare the glory days of pre-DMCA to the revisionist days of post-DMCA. When it comes to gameplay, the gripe here is that new KU and old KU are incredibly similar when it comes to gameplay. It's a sandbox game. You select a kaiju, spawn, fight, break buildings, get G-cells, yada yada yada. You get the point. If this was purely based off roster, I would have given this to old KU. But when it comes to new KU, they handle ground kaiju a lot better just by giving more complex and more engaging kaiju. While there are several issues to having complex kaijus, and frankly, simple kaijus are a lot better, and there is a charm to old KU and the simplicity to the gameplay that makes playing the game a lot more intriguing. But for new KU, it just feels a lot more rewarding to kill a kaiju in fair combat. Whether you want to call that needlessly hard grinding, or if you want to call that immersive gameplay, you can call it what you will. However, there is a topic that I want to touch on real quick, and that is how KU handles flyers right now. Flyers in general were poorly balanced pre-DMCA. That's completely out of the question. However, the way they played by having a hard counter and grounding, that made it a lot better than what they are now. The issue with them being unbalanced was not because they were overtuned, but because not many kaijus had good verticals and grounding. Obviously, there are many exceptions to this because there were some flyers back then that were just god, but most of them were fine for the most part. With new KU, flyers, they don't cancel regen. They are significantly slower than they were, and they are for some reason good on the ground, and nearly every ground kaiju either has insane grounding, excellent verticals, or both. And for that reason, flyers are much more poorly made than how they were back then. That being said, I'm going to give gameplay to new KU, and I don't think it's close, actually. Even though I just made that whole rant about flyers, I really don't think that gameplay is close at all. Roster is not too relevant because new KU is directly on track to surpass old KU's roster. In addition to that, there were only like 30 relevant kaiju back then, whereas now most kaiju are very relevant and used at least when the game is popular. The only thing about old KU that has gameplay over is that flyers were just so much better to play back then. And besides that, new KU beats old KU in gameplay like in pretty much every single factor. The second criteria I'm going to list is balancing. Now, this is a very debated topic, which a part of the game is most unbalanced. And, well, if you were there back then, at first glance, you might say old KU. And I've seen a lot of people who claim old KU is poorly balanced. This is true, but there are many who claim that new KU has better balancing. This is a completely near objectively false notion, as I will get into in just a second. While I do have a video planned on why KU's bouncing is such a terrible aspect of the gameplay, in fact, I think it is the worst aspect of the gameplay, I'll be getting much more into detail there than I will in here, as today I'm just comparing the two games bouncing, which in my opinion is easily and undoubtedly old KU. Without a sliver of a doubt, old KU was infinitely more balanced. First, I will list the categories that I will compare to the balancing today. First is the overall balancing state of the game, second is meta, third is ground kaiju balancing, fourth is flyer balancing, last and most definitely least is water balancing. Let's compare the overall balancing state of current KU versus pre-DMC KU first. As of the time of writing this video, which is before the Doomsday update, as I am most confident it will add some sort of balance wave that cripples the game even further, I will talk about the overall state of balancing game pre-Doomsday update. Early games are first. Now, early games, they're overtuned, they're unbalanced, and they're too overpowered for what they are worth. It is obvious that the balancers of this game are clueless as how to balance early games. We have Orath that can chain 2.2 thousand damage from its beams like every 20 seconds while having a near spammable dash and, of course, a spammable melee. We have Scythios, which erases half of your health with a beam. This is mostly a status effect issue, not really an early game issue. However, we have a Katsumi, a DPS machine that has iframes and a beam. I can go on and on, you get the point. Early games are an absolute mess in new KU. In old KU, early games weren't necessarily good at all, but they were good enough for you to find your groove, get some G-cells, and progress faster. While early games were mostly not balanced, ranging from being underpowered to overpowered, there are more early games that are well balanced back then as opposed to early games that are balanced now, which in my opinion, none of the early games right now are even close to being balanced at all. Mid-game kaijus, they're also going to go to old KU as well. In old KU, mid-games were perfect for their position. They were equally viable and allowed you to progress fast and even dominate a little bit. Mid-games right now are honestly the most overpowered group of kaiju, the most consistently overpowered group of kaiju. You have a ground kaiju obliterator like Sakura. You have Sabri that can spam 600 damage unpunishable ability 3 times in a row without consequence. And I will note that this will be fixed in the Doomsday update, but the fact that it has been in the game for 5 months is genuine carelessness, and the fact that it was even created in the first place is atrocious development direction. Other overpowered mid-game examples include Armor Piece, which has a 3000 damage pulse that released in week 8 and has been more and more unbalanced as the updates come out. Even though they've tried to change it, each time it just somehow gets worse. It's something when it's bad for an update, but when it's consistently broken for update after update, it just says so much about how bad the bouncing direction of the game is right now. Then you have Karki, which has a 1.8k damage combo with only 4 damage points, which this is nothing but disgusting. And as a Karki main, I honestly don't trust this game to make a rescript, as they will 1000% ruin the kaiju. Then you have Strike Ridge, a flyer that literally has a 2.3k damage concentrated nuke ability. Mid-games back then were much more straightforward and fair. G19, possibly being one of the most balanced kaiju in the game's history, had decent health, had good speed, had a really good beam, had solid DPS. It was the perfect balance of what a mid-game should be, and every single mid-game that comes out now should literally follow the blueprint. It doesn't have to be the same kit, but the same standard that G19 said. You have other mid-games like Rose Bio, Behemoth, G19, and so much more that were a lot more fair than the mid-games today. And then we have late games. This is perhaps, in my opinion, the most one-sided play for old KU. Late games in old KU were near perfect for their balancing stage. You had G21, a brawler with a great beam, a very straightforward and broken in the right hands, pathetic in the wrong hands. You had Muto Prime, which is easily more balanced than Ramthor, having jump tech over a good A4 and good A5, which is the perfect balance in kaiju to kaiju. Ramthor right now is near impossible to be bad, whereas Muto Prime you have to be skilled to compete in the meta. And even if you were average, you could do a lot more with the Muto Prime than a new player was. This led to more rewarding feels upon using Muto Prime compared to Ramthor, and in balancing terms, Ramthor is 1000% reliant on the A4 spam and landing the infections, whereas Muto Prime had much more other ways of combat. I get that there is a balancing issue when your A4 and your A5 are useless, but I would take old Muto Prime balancing any day over Ramthor's balancing, because Ramthor is just so reliant on landing the infection and so reliant on its stun A4. Making the A4 stun is absolutely the wrong way to make Ramthor balanced. I don't know what was in their minds when they made that. In UKU, late games range from super overpowered to super useless. You have Nutcracker, which is like the most irrelevant kaiju ever, and then you have Rhaegar, which is consistently proven to have endgame strength. Late games, back then, they had the perfect consistency of strength while not being completely overpowered. And to anyone who wants to bring up K21, I hate to break it to you, but Dredger, the K21 replacement, is much more unbalanced than K21. I did not bother to pay attention to the May rebalance wave that they had on Dredger, but everyone I've spoken to said it just made Dredger severely underpowered, which is in fact bad balancing. And since there's no fun in debating a weak version of a kaiju versus a broken version of a kaiju, I will compare pre-destructed Dredger versus pre-DMC K21. K21 had low health, a mediocre heal, a really overpowered parry, I'll give it that, broken delays on the melees, and hefty range with the Axe 5. Most of the things that made K21 overpowered were bugs, like the moving healing bug, the infinite axe bug. People like to forget that K21 really was not that good without abusing some bugs. Well, I'm not going to say that it wasn't that good. It wasn't as broken. It wasn't as overpowered without some bugs. And then we have Dredger. Spammable health steal attack that does 2,000 damage and stuns. It had Berserk Eva level of DPS on the mace mode, had insane verticals, has blatant extendos on many attacks, has a 1.8k damage parry that activates even if you don't hit it, which also gives it iframes. Was trashed underwater, has a garbage normal A1, has a 800 damage projectile that stuns. Its A4 had like near busted range. It was pretty much impossible to avoid the A4, which also did like 1,000. Do I even need to keep going? Dredger made K21 look like an ant. Now, I understand Dredger is new and it is likely to get balanced in the future. However, I will note that I do not trust the balancing team to balance a starter because they can't. They've tried repeatedly to make early games fair, and they come out looking like end games. Anyways, yeah, I got my point across. Late games are not close. Old KU guessed that pretty easily. The only, and I mean only, exception to this is -1, which was easily more unbalanced than any modern late game. The hilarious asterisk over that is -1's reign. Yeah, -1's reign is that the fact that you could spam the infinite rain. If you could not spam this, -1 would actually be one of the most balanced late games, not just of pre-DMC, but of the entire game's history. I digress. Now we go to the aspect of the balancing that's actually pretty close, and that is endgames. Old KU had 6 endgames: Eva, Dest, MZ, Bio, Ultima, and MG21. New KU has Incineros, Fargoth, and Morkage. I could include Stormlord and Tinsen, but many people don't consider them endgames, and this makes the position weaker for endgames actually, because I personally consider Storm one of the most consistently well-balanced endgames of New KU, and I also consider Tinsen to be one of the worst balanced endgames of KU, so adding them really will not change anything. So for now, I'll only compare the trio to whatever the sixth version of a trio is. First, I'll address the elephant into the room. Dest. This is obviously the most unbalanced endgame. It had the most health in the game. It was fast at 2 beams, both of which did more than 2,000 damage. A 700 melee, you get the point. If you ever played old KU, you know how broken Dest was. I'm not even going to try to debate this. Dest is more unbalanced than anything new KU has. But in my opinion, the most balanced endgame was Eva. Eva had the perfect balance of flaws while having the perfect balance of strength. People like to say that Berserk Eva was broken. I detest this notion. The only thing wrong about Berserk Eva was that it had a heal ability, and that's it. Other than that, it had the perfect DPS to justify its low HP and startup usage. It had an effective parry and a somewhat useless A4. Did this mode need a heal? Absolutely not, but it's KU. You can't expect everything to be perfect. However, Eva does not come without flaws in the balancing. The ability to spam gun and to spam its spear throw was indeed broken, but that's about it for Eva's balancing. Its set speed that never increased, 4,000 base health, it was expensive as hell, hard to max, and it genuinely took some skill in some aspects to justify owning it. And Monster Zero could have been the most balanced endgame if it didn't have the Alpha Storm that allowed it to beat pretty much every single land kaiju just by face tanking it, and using the other tools it has to beat the remaining other ground kaiju that it couldn't beat by abusing its storm. If its Alpha Storm wasn't so overtuned, MZ would be the most balanced endgame. Ultima could also be included in the conversation of the most balanced endgame if it couldn't beam and mist at the same time. The mist was not an issue. The issue with Ultima's balancing was neither the beam or the mist. It was the fact that you could do both at the same time, and other than that, Ultima was pretty fair. MG21 is one of the more mixed ones. On one hand, it took a lot of skill to make the melees work, and on the other hand, you could beat most land kaiju just by spamming the missiles and the beam. Call it what you will, but I personally think that maybe the missiles needed a bit of tuning, but that was about it. And lastly, Bio, I can't really comment on this because I've never personally owned Bio. It could not be bothered to level up Rose Bio, but from what I heard, it was pretty well balanced. Now I will go from the endgames of modern KU. Yeah, I'll go from unbalanced to most balanced here, I suppose. Incineros is easily the most unbalanced endgame, ranging from the best kaiju to absolutely garbage. Genuinely so inconsistent, and the more often than not that it's exceptionally undertuned for an endgame, the balancers have demonstrated over and over and over that their balancing competence is honestly limited to mid games, and that is about it. Everything else they are consistently bad at. Now we go to Vargoth. This kaiju, unlike Incin, is consistently underpowered. He gets nerfed frequently and for no reason, except in the water where he's genuinely broken as hell. The two endgames I've listed are more late game, mid game than actual endgame in terms of strength. And then we have Morkage, and apart from release Morkage, pretty much every single version of this kaiju was fair until 2026. Now, not only did 2026 introduce a horrible rescript on Morkage that basically did nothing for the kaiju, but also turned him from a balanced low DPS range reliant endgame into a DPS machine. I spit at this awful decision, and this is one of the many consequences of making a charmingly simple and fun kaiju into a broken, unbalanced, needlessly complex slop. Other examples like this include Garmadra, Amorpiece, Stormlord, Saberyu, Lorgath, and so much more. Overall balancing goes to old KU, without a doubt. But first, I want to talk about the endgames for a bit and tell you exactly why endgames are, what's the word? I'd say underpowered. They are pretty underpowered now, and the main reason as to why they are so underpowered, it's because they forgot how to balance the endgames. They genuinely did. It feels like every single time they try to balance an endgame, they either nerf it or they buff it too much. They don't know how to make the perfect blend of having its flaws and having its strengths. And then Eva is literally the perfect example of how to make, a balanced endgame. Eva had a huge weakness in flyers, and I know there is an issue in that Eva as an endgame should have had more tools to fight against flyers, but easily among all the other endgames that new KU has, Eva's the most balanced out of them. I don't think this is contestable. So what I feel, they should try to follow the blueprint of balancing for endgames, obviously excluding Dest because Dest was a mess. Eva specifically. For Eva, they really should try to use that as a blueprint to balance endgames, and then once they've actually nailed down good balancing, then they go from there. Then they try to perfect it. Before you try and get perfect balancing, you should try to get good balancing first. And I feel like that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to take a shortcut. They look at old KU and they see all these balancing flaws, and they think that now that we're in new KU, the balancing is suddenly magically good. It's magically revisionary. That's not the case. They're trying to take a shortcut to make everything perfectly balanced. So much so that they did not stop and think, hey, before we try to perfect this, is this even good? Yeah, that's how I feel about this. I genuinely do not think that they know how to balance endgames, and the reason why I said that the endgames were close was really just because of Dest. If Dest didn't exist, then old KU would take endgames pretty easily, but Dest is still a thing that we have to take into account because it's atrociously balanced. So yeah, endgames easily go to old KU. Now we have Meta. Old KU's Meta were flyers, and new KU's Meta is, I don't even know. I don't even know what is Meta. It seems like everything in KU is viable or good. If you don't see an issue with that, you generally have no balancing sense. If everything is viable, then absolutely nothing is. Some kaijus are supposed to be niche. Others are meant to be Meta. This is correct. This is order. This is how it should be. And this is why old KU's roster, while absurdly lackluster in ratio to viable kaiju to irrelevant kaiju, worked. As for ground kaiju bouncing, I'm gonna have to give it to new KU. Actually, old KU's ground kaijus genuinely could not compete against flyers unless they had good grounding or good verticals, which were pretty much sparse. And ground versus ground kaiju, while engaging, pretty much went the same way. More DPS equals better, easier path to victory. New KU is so much more than that, and this is mainly due to variety in playstyle. You could have a weak, fluffy kaiju like Sakura and didn't have enough high damage abilities and genuinely could dominate New KU. However, if Sakura gets caught, it's literally done. Then you have Rei, a kaiju that relies on abusing knockback on and extenders while having a status effect gimmick. And when it comes to brawlers, you have great examples here like Garmadra. At least until the rescript, when it got abolished and became absolutely garbage. I strongly give ground kaiju balancing to new KU. Now we have flyers. Old KU's meta was flyers. While ground kaiju were viable against other kaiju pre-DMCA, flyers were easily the meta. And while many can and will argue that this is incorrect, I see little issue with this except for genuine balancing atrocities like Trodan, Dest, Mothman, and Kamadolf. Most other flyers were good, but had heavy asterisks on them and generally took a lot of skill and mastery to make them as good due to them having low damage attacks, low health speeds, and low health fast speeds, and most of them, with the exception of Batra and Megig, had a weak point in getting grounded where they were absolutely helpless. This is correct. Kaiju is good when used properly. Kaiju has very exploitable weakness and a clear way to counter it, and the consequence of failing to exploit said weakness is death. Do not give them a second chance. Compare that to modern KU, where flyers can no longer cancel regen, have insane viability on the ground, and have to thrive in a meta where ground kaijus have not only just grounding but good verticals. It is an absolute nightmare to play as a flyer, and not only do you not get any satisfaction from playing in the air because it takes a million years to kill your opponent, you also have to deal with insane verticals and grounding on every single land, near to every single land kaiju. It is abysmal. If all they had done was tune up the broken, unbalanced flyers of pre-DMCA and give them decent grounding or verticals to some ground kaiju, then they would be fine. They would literally be fine. But the flyer experience is infinitely worse in every way. Not only to mention that original kaiju, PG devs, they have no clue how to make flyers for some reason now. You have Faller, which is just a ground kaiju with a flying option. You have Zyron, a broken flyer with absurd ground DPS. You have Talcon and Strike Rich, with both have broken ground DPS, busted beams, and insane flying potential. If both of these kaiju didn't have extended hurt boxes, which is another trait that makes modern flyers completely unbearable to use, then they would be some of the best kaijus in the game, if they aren't already. There is zero tonal dissonance when it comes to bouncing flyers. Nothing is consistent, and it has been like this since 2024, and this is easily the worst bouncing aspect of new KU. Flyer balancing easily goes to old kaiju universe. Lastly, for balancing, we have water balancing. There is no winner here, honestly. Water balancing is absolutely atrocious. If I had to choose one, it would be old KU, because at least the water kaiju back then were actually good in the water, unlike nowadays where the most random kaiju like Var and Scythe dominate the oceans. I could go on and on and on, but literally, who even cares about water combat? It's annoying, obnoxious, and very one-sided. I guess with the addition of traits, it's been made a little bit better. Nobody really cares about water combat, so I'm gonna give this to literally no one. Great. Moving on. Now we have progression and economy. If this video were made in pre-August of 2025, I would give this to old KU without a second thought. But something miraculous happened after that. KU and the devs, they actually listened to the fan base. I know, it's insane, it's crazy. And they added a good change, a good change. That did bring the game back to life until the genius devs decided to have a second update route. Now let's compare the progression of each version of the game. Old KU early games, they had their role. They introduced you to the basic mechanics of the game. They were somewhat viable, I suppose, and most importantly, they were good enough to lead you to the mid-game era smoothly, and when you got good at the game, you could come back to them and try them out some more. This is correct. This is basic progression. This is, progressing the game, early game, mid game, late game, end game. Early game does its role perfectly well. It introduces you to everything and it gets you to mid game smoothly. By the time you've learned the early games, you're pretty much hooked onto the game. Now, early game progression at the moment is fucking atrocious. These early games are needlessly complex to learn. The devs think that making early games strong and overpowered will make the early game players actually want to play the game. Now, all this does is piss off the actual fan base. Appealing to newer players is incorrect. Properly balancing your game and making early games actual early games and end games actual end games is what will make an early game want to play the game. Let me give you an example. When I was leveling Shin 3 in old KU and I got brutalized by an Ultima, my thought wasn't, oh, the Kaijus are so strong, I shouldn't play this game. No, my thoughts were, fuck man, that Kaiju is super powerful, I should try and get this. Might be going back on balancing a little bit here, but a major reason why the KU devs keep nerfing endgames is because they think they are too strong and will make newer players quit. This is incorrect. This is a strawman approach that assumes that the player base is too stupid to know that early games are meant to be strong and the purpose of the game is to progress fast. I get the idea of giving cool kaijus to early games, like a Kujin or like Lorgath, but when you include a bar, when you include multiple abilities and 2 kits, like, you make things much too complex. And there are examples of this, such as a Katsume and Zaratan. Well, not really a Katsume. I'd say a Katsume before the rework, but Zaratan for sure should not be an early game. And, well, honestly, Karamok too. Yeah, well, that's just my preference. Anyways, what makes early game progression so bad isn't that the kaiju are too uncool or that the end games are too powerful. It is because the early games represent pretty much everything else about the rest of the game, and they are far too complex to learn. If your early game kaiju is hard to learn, then why would anyone want to play the game? Like, it genuinely baffles me when I see early game players trying to use the A2 on Orath. They don't know how to do things. They don't know how to play it. When you include multiple abilities and 2 kits, you make things much too complex. When you give a tail attack, a dash ability, you make things much too complex. It is genuinely sad, like, trying to watch the early games use the A2. They don't know how to use it. They just don't, because the attack is just, it looks completely out of place in Orath's kit. I don't want to make this go on a tangent rant about Orath, but they really need to remodel that thing. Well, okay, now that we established how terrible early game progression is, I will give New KU its flowers, because on the topic of progression, it gets pretty much everything else about progression and economy of the game right. Mid and late game and ultimately end game progression is clear improvement from old KU. Well, simply because there are much more options to grind G cells and XP. You can grind buildings, you can fight NPCs, you can fight kaiju, you can fight military, there are boss fights, and you can still have a good time with it. There's much more to do, and the issues in progression, like a level 0 kaiju, you know, feeling not much different from a max kaiju in terms of strength, or like, you know, endgame kaiju being too weak, they are a result of balancing. And I could be petty and take the progression aspect away from the game due to the balancing, but I will give the game credit where credit is due, at the expense of simply you like understanding that balancing is such a major aspect of the game that it does affect more than one area, progression being one of them. And with the Doomsday update, progression has been made so much better. You could notice overall XP and G-Cell gains increased at the price of everything having ever so slightly more XP. I have no issue with this at all, and I feel like the progression of the game has improved very well within the past 2 years, and ultimately, I feel that it's better than old KU. However, I will be obligated to say that old KU's progression aspect was much more fair and much more efficient, but not quite as good overall. This being said, I will give the slight edge of progression to New KU. It is close, but New KU just does a lot more things better in terms of progression and economy. And moving on to the fourth topic, is technical stability. This is basically just FPS and performance. I'll make this quick. It goes to old KU very easily. New KU just has too many features that overlord the game. Ping is terribly bad, it drops way too often, other regions are completely unplayable, and the FPS is so inconsistent on lower end devices that I genuinely cannot play on my iPhone unless I'm literally at 0 graphics. I need to use my PC, and KU still drains most of my RAM usage. Fucking terrible. Old KU's performance was nowhere near this bad, and the biggest issue with this is how inconsistent this is. KU's performance... Did I say inconsistent? I meant how consistent this issue is. KU's performance is consistently bad, the game is consistently laggy, spikes are far too frequent, and the Doomsday update has made this ever more relevant. This is the second biggest flaw, and really, it's one of the only flaws with new KU. Technical stability goes to old KU very easily. We are now 2-2 in score between old KU versus new KU, and these next three aspects will decide which version of the game is truly better. Next up, we have content and variety. This obviously goes to new KU. Just look at how much the game has improved the past few years. New and exciting kaijus, immersive map structure, constant reduxes and rescripts, however bad they may be, many kinds of NPCs, military events, trades, bosses, and there are probably more that I'm forgetting. Old KU simplicity was indeed charming, but aside from practical gameplay and popular reference, the game did not have much to offer overall. Now we have polish and quality of life. I would give this to new KU, since they have their own sound designs and they actively try to introduce new quality of life features. However, both of these features have major asterisks on them, with sound design update in August of last year composing of like 20 sounds. Keep in mind, each kaiju needs like 8 or 9 sounds in order to be like fully complete. Look at the current sounds, man. I'm just gonna show you a few examples of kaijus literally using placeholder sound. And then quality of life features, well, man, these are okay and all, but why does every single quality of life feature tend to have more bugs every time they release? And yes, with the Doomsday update, they have patched most of the game's long-lasting bugs, but when I say that trying to play this game in 2024 and 2025 was hard, I really do mean it. Every new update had a game-breaking bug. Every new bug fix added multiple bugs. Bugs at some point were a bigger issue than bouncing, and yes, I mean that. Due to how many bugs each update tends to introduce, and how unfinished recent kaijus such as Talcron and honestly, Fernilis too, and pretty much every single rescript in 2026, it's just not polished. So I'm gonna have to give this to old KU. And look, yes, the Doomsday update did patch most of the game's bugs, but that's one update. That's one update. We don't know if they're going to be consistent with this or not. We really don't. So, yeah, I'm going to have to go with old KU for this, because it's just, like, new KU just isn't even polished at all. Yeah, okay, we are now 3-3 with the final aspect of the game comparison being development. Anyways, the winner is old KU easily. The only close aspect here was progression, which could have gone to old KU, which would make it 5-2, but it is 4-3. Jokes aside, let me explain why the development is so bad. Now, this is probably because development includes the rebalancing team, which have sabotaged the game over and over and over again. But even if we don't talk about the balancing, just look at the current dev team. They rarely listen to the community. They have inconsistent update schedules. They have no communication skills. Either that or they just hate the community, which honestly, I wouldn't even blame them if they did, but jokes aside, okay. Really, I don't have to explain this. Like, anyone who's experienced new KU knows how bad the development is, unless you, like, started playing, like, 2 weeks ago. And don't get me wrong, the devs, they were not that great in old KU, but at least we had consistent update schedules. The kaijus would be unbalanced at first and would immediately get fixed like a week later. Nowadays, it's just sabotage bouncing wave after sabotage bouncing wave over and over and over. It's disgusting. Unbalanced kaiju becomes more unbalanced more. It's so putrid. However, the development does have redeeming aspects. For one, they are talented, and their talent is clearly showing as the years go by. I mean, just look at all their dev streams during early 2024. They had a clear vision for this game. And they could use the IP of Godzilla to make something truly immersive, but with new KU, I feel like they're also just doing that, but I feel like we'll never know, okay? We'll never know because old KU's gone for good, but man, new KU is just so much better visually and professionally than old KU that I kind of want to see what these talented devs would do with old KU. If it was still around today, I doubt it would be as low quality. Anyways, no, I'm still gonna give development to old KU because at least they weren't they weren't antisocial. At least they weren't scared to talk to the community. Yeah, development goes to old KU, which makes the ultimate winner of old Kaiju universe versus new Kaiju universe, old KU. And this is not because of like Godzilla. This is not because of like any nostalgia based region. I genuinely compared all 7 aspects of which I believe to be the most prominent when comparing the games, and I genuinely came to the conclusion that I think old KU is better than new KU in most of these objects, in most of these, like, it's kind of hard to explain because, look, when it comes to new KU, yes, you could argue that content and variety is more important than something like technical stability or something like progression. But like, okay, I'll get into this, all right? First, I would like to note that despite my criteria of which game was better revolving around these 7 criteria that I discussed, the game's overall quality really is not limited to these, and I will make a bonus round discussing common myths that both sides of the spectrum use to justify why their version of the game is better. The first myth is no Godzilla. Yeah, unless you genuinely found the gameplay in the Godzilla's funner and more exciting than the originals of today, I don't see a world where the fact that Godzilla is gone can genuinely get in the way of your enjoyment for this game. Look, I miss Godzilla Kaiju so much, and I truly would give anything out to try the old game again, but can we get past this trite and tired motion? Look, this myth that Godzilla being gone is ruining the game. You do not need Godzilla to have fun, and until you let go of the past, you will never appreciate what you currently have at hand, which is indeed a good game that does not need Godzilla to make it good. Look, but it's not like new KU players there are any better. I already debunked a major myth that new KU is more balanced than old KU in this video, so I will go after another point that the modern day PG shills like to say. The old game was of poorer quality and the gameplay was generic and basic. Despite how extremely vague and bare these assertions are, there is indeed some truth to it, but there is hypocrisy because the new game isn't exactly that much advanced in terms of quality, especially before the Doomsday update. To make things simple for the new KU players, that's why I personally believe old KU is better. It ultimately comes down to 3 primary issues that I have with new KU: performance, balancing, and bugs. On the latter, KU is drastically improving in with the Doomsday update patching hundreds of bugs. However, I will not forgive years of terrible game-breaking bugs because of one update. I need to see much more consistency before rewarding new KU with the honorary award of having a functional game. And of course, when it comes to bouncing and performance, KU is absolutely deteriorating, and especially in bouncing. Every single update introduces a new garbage rebalance wave and like plus 500 ping. Time will tell if they fix performance, but balancing I doubt will ever improve. Again, only time will tell. But like, in conclusion of the debate of which game is better, I award it to old KU, and I do stand firmly on that. New KU has much higher highs, but it has lower lows, and when I say lower lows, I really mean it. Old KU is consistent in updates, quality, and balancing. 3 things that new KU is not, and the primary thing new KU just like is consistent. Other than bad balancing, new KU is not consistent at anything. It is one mess of a game that is in dire need of a saving grace. And the Doomsday update was indeed that saving grace that they needed. Their goal right now should be to patch all of the current issues that I listed in this video today, because, look, if update drowns won't kill the game, these issues will eventually kill the game. Old KU was so popular despite having bad bouncing because of an IP. New KU does not have that IP, and I have seen many games come and fall due to bad bouncing, quality, and performance. New KU is definitely going to have to address these issues sooner or later, as how often they want to hide and like act like these issues don't exist, especially balancing. I've seen the PG devs talk about balancing in such a way that like They don't think it's important at all when it really is. And I've talked with so many community members about how bad this game's bouncing is, and most people agree. I have not had a single conversation with someone who has disagreed with me on this. They genuinely need to address this. But yeah, anyways, to conclude this video, I will have a note. It is very much possible for new KU to beat old KU overall, and it likely will, simply due to polishing and technical stability. And I predict that in a year, new KU would have gotten good performance and less bugs. So I predict that that new KU will take these aspects in, and it will beat old KU in them. But I also predict that the bouncing will spiral worse and worse, and ultimately it will affect other aspects of the game and make progression go back to old KU, which would make the overall score 4-3, with new KU having gameplay, content variety, presentation and polish, and technical stability, with old KU taking progression, balancing, and development. Development can also increase though, but I seriously doubt. If they haven't increased in 2025 in like 2 years, I doubt they're going to start increasing now. Nothing much more to say now. I strongly believe balancing is the significant reason as to why old KU is so much better in my eyes. And for all of you who agree with me and are passionate with how poorly the game is balanced, I have a perfect video coming for you that covers every aspect of balancing and how it is consistently and terribly bad with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And I will also list the solutions to fixing said issues, because unlike these numbskull balancers, I actually know what I am talking about. In the future parts of this video, I will be covering which version of the game requires more skill and which version of the game is more powerful. That being said, I have nothing more to say. I hope you all enjoyed this and took a lot from this video, and I hope if you are a new KU player, you realize the faults within the game, and if you are an old player, that you realize that this game, while maybe worse than the old version in my opinion, does indeed have a lot of potential and can truly be something great. And I urge you to give this game a chance, because it may yet surprise you. This video was not made to dunk on any version of the game. I enjoyed both versions of the game very much, very heavily, but I just made it to share my opinion and critique both versions of the game and praise both versions of the game. And I have nothing more to say. I will see you in part 2, and bye.